several cultivators rowed toward the black shadow in the water, chasing it with their nets. Elsewhere, someone shouted, "It's here too." Indeed, another shadow flitted through the water on the other side of the lake. Several narrow boats flew toward the black silhouette, nets trailing behind them, but the nets turned up empty. Wei Wuxian said, "Strange, the shadow isn't shaped like a human. Plus, it keeps changing, suddenly long and then suddenly short, suddenly big, then suddenly small." Then he suddenly shouted, "Lan Chan, next to your boat." In response, Beechin flew out from the scabbard on Lan Wangji's back and pierced the water. After a moment, it flew out with a sharp hiss, producing an iridescent spray. However, the sword had struck nothing. Lan Wangji gripped the sword in his hand, his expression focused and grave. Right as he was about to open his mouth, a disciple across from him sent his own sword flying, thrusting at the shadow in the river as it sped by. But after the sword went underwater, it never returned. No matter how many times the disciple tried summoning it back, nothing answered. The sword seemed to have been swallowed by the lake, leaving neither a shadow nor a trace. The disciple seemed about the same age as Wei Wuxian and the other youths. After losing his sword, his face turned paler and paler. "Su She, we haven't even figured out what's in the water," an older disciple beside him said. "Why did you send your sword into the lake without permission?" Su She seemed somewhat panicked, but his expression remained calm as he answered, "I saw Second Master Lan had sent his sword in." But before he had finished, he realized his words were ignorant and improper. Lan Wangji and the sword Beechin were incomparable. No matter what, others couldn't hope to match up. No matter how little he knew of the enemy he was facing, Lan Wangji would have no problem commanding his sword to fly into the water. But the same was not true for others. Crimson blotches of shame peeked through Su She's now blue-white skin. He looked at Lan Wangji as though the more talented boy had somehow insulted him. But Lan Wangji was busy scrutinizing the water and didn't notice. In a flash, Beechin flew out of its scabbard once more. This time, the blade didn't submerge itself, but instead jabbed its tip at a shadow darting by, flipping it out of the water. A lacquer black and dripping wet ball of material landed on the bottom of Lan Wangji's boat. Wei Wuxian stood on his toes, craning his neck for a peek. It was a garment. He laughed so hard he risked toppling headfirst into the river. "Lan Chan, you're amazing," he said. "In all my time clearing out water ghosts, this is the first time I've seen someone pull off a ghost's clothes." Lan Wangji was busy checking Beechin's blade for any changes, apparently having already decided to ignore all of Wei Wuxian's attempts at conversation. Zheng Chang spoke up. "You should shut your mouth. The thing that swam past us wasn't a water ghost. It was nothing more than a set of clothes." Of course, Wei Wuxian had seen all of this perfectly clearly. Only, if he didn't needle Lan Wangji, his entire body would start feeling out of sorts. "So the thing darting back and forth just now was only a set of clothes?" he asked. "No wonder our nets couldn't catch it, and our swords couldn't penetrate it. Its shape keeps changing. But a set of clothes can't devour a cultivator's sword. There has to be something else in the water." By then, the boats had already floated toward the center of Lake Biling, whose water was a dark, inky green. Suddenly, Lan Wangji lifted his head slightly. "We must return immediately," he said. "Why?" Lan Xichin asked. The creature in the water intentionally lured our boats to the center of Lake Biling, Lan Wangji replied. The words had barely left his lips when everyone felt the hulls of their vessels begin to sink. The water rapidly crept upward, spilling into the boats. Suddenly, Wei Wuxian realized that the lake water was no longer inky green, but almost black. Out of nowhere, an immense whirlpool appeared in the center of the lake, surrounding them in all directions. The dozen or so boats began circling the whirlpool center, dragged along by the currents, sinking deeper and deeper, as though a gigantic black mouth was sucking them down. The shings of swords exiting their scabbards rang in peals, and one by one, everyone mounted their sword. Wei Wuxian had already flown into the air when, upon bending his neck and looking down, he saw Su She, the disciple who had sent his sword into the lake, standing knee-deep in the water. The hull of his boat had already sunk beneath the water's surface. His expression was filled with panic, yet he didn't call for help. Perhaps he had been scared witless. Without thinking, Wei Wuxian bent down and extended his hand. He grabbed the disciple's wrist and dragged him up as he ascended. However, not long after, something jerked Su She downwards and nearly dragged Wei Wuxian off his blade. The disciple's lower body had already been swallowed by the black whirlpool. It spun faster and faster, and he continued to sink deeper and deeper, as though something hidden beneath the water was pulling on his legs. Mounted on Sun Du, Zhang Cheng had risen calmly until he was about 60 meters above the whirlpool before he looked down. Filled with displeasure at what he saw, he shouted and dove down. "What are you up to now?" The suction force inside Lake Biling grew ever stronger. Wei Wuxian's sword was optimized for agility, and consequently, its strength happened to fall just short, and they were nearly pulled to the surface of the lake. Wei Wuxian steadied himself and held onto Su She with both hands. "Someone help," he shouted. "If I can't pull him up soon, I'll have to let go." Suddenly, the back of Wei Wuxian's collar tightened, and his body was lifted into the air. He twisted his neck and saw Lan Wangji holding him up with one hand. Though the boy's indifferent gaze was directed elsewhere, he and his sword alone had no trouble bearing the weight of 3 people, even fighting against the mysterious force inside the lake. They rose higher and higher at a stable pace. Slightly shocked, Zhang Cheng thought, "If I had gotten to Wei Wuxian first on Sandu, I probably couldn't have flown back up so quickly and steadily. But Lan Wangji's about the same age as me." At this time, Wei Wuxian said, "Lan Chan, your sword must be pretty strong, right?" Thank you, but why do you have to lift me up by my collar? Can't you just pull me up normally? You're making me really uncomfortable here. How about I stick my hand out toward you, and you can pull me up by the arm instead?" "I do not touch strangers," Lan Wangji responded coldly. "We already know each other so well. How do I count as a stranger?" "We do not," Lan Wangji said. Wei Wuxian feigned injury at his words. "You're unbelievable." Zhang Cheng could no longer endure his disciple brother's behavior. "You're unbelievable," he roared. "Can't you talk a little less when someone's dangling you by the collar in mid-air?" The group swiftly fled Lake Biling on their swords, landing on the shore. Lan Wangji relaxed his right hand and released his grip on Wei Wuxian's collar. He turned unhurriedly and spoke to Lan Xichen. "This is an aquatic abyss," he said. Lan Xichen nodded. This will be a thorny problem. As soon as the words aquatic abyss were uttered, Wei Wuxian and Zhang Cheng understood. The most frightening thing in Lake Biling and the adjoining rivers wasn't some water ghost, but the flowing water itself. Because of the terrain, or the way the current naturally moved, some rivers and lakes were frequent sites of shipwrecks or people falling overboard. Over time, such areas would grow a personality and become spoiled, just as a pampered princess expected her silks, feasts, and jewelry. That region of water would start expecting sacrifices of cargo ships and human bodies. If it didn't receive them, it would attempt to acquire them itself. The people of Sai Town and the surrounding regions were good swimmers who knew the waters well, so drownings and shipwrecks in the area had always been rare. Consequently, the waters nearby couldn't possibly have produced an aquatic abyss. Its appearance here could have only one explanation. It was chased here from somewhere else. Once an aquatic abyss was formed, all the water within the area transformed into a single, highly tenacious monster. The only way to get rid of it was to suck the lake or river dry, clear it of all people and objects that had sunk in the water, and expose the lake or riverbed to harsh sunlight for 3 to 5 years. Thus, these things were nearly impossible to eliminate. However, there was another way to rid oneself of the problem for a while. It was at others' expense. Chase it away to another body of water, allowing it to bring disaster to somewhere else. Have any places recently been disturbed by aquatic abysses? Lin Wangji asked. Lin Xichin pointed skyward. He was pointing at none other than the sun. Wei Wuxian and Zhang Cheng exchanged glances and thought. The Qishan Wen clan, sects of cultivation, big and small, were scattered all over the land like countless stars in the night sky. However, there was one amongst them which loomed above the rest like a colossus, the Qishan Wen clan. The Wen clan took the sun as their symbol to signify that they contended with the sun in radiance and matched it in longevity. Their seat was as vast as a city and was named the Nightless Heaven. It was also sometimes called the Nightless City. It was said that, indeed, night never fell upon the city, and it was named a colossus because regardless of how many disciples other sects had, or how powerful they were, or the land they occupied, or the weapons they owned, the Qishan Wen clan left them all in the dust. It was entirely unrivaled. Many cultivators even viewed entering the clan as a guest disciple as amongst the highest of honors. Based on their way of doing things, they were very likely to be the ones who had chased the aquatic abyss here. Though everyone now knew the origin of the lake haunting, they kept silent. If it had been the Wen clan's doing, nothing could be done about it, regardless of how many condemnations people levied or accusations they hurled. Firstly, that clan would never acknowledge their wrongdoing, and secondly, it would never offer any form of reparation. One disciple fumed. By driving the aquatic abyss here, it's like the other clan is trying to bring disaster to Sai Town. If it grows bigger and enters the town's rivers and canals, so many people will be risking their lives every day, living on top of a monster. It's having become the recipient of someone else's discarded problem, the Gusu Lan clan would, from this point on, be forced into the tiresome and unending task of dealing with it themselves. Lin Xichin sighed and said, forget it. Let us return. They boarded new boats at the ferry crossing and rowed toward the busiest part of town. As their vessels passed under the arch bridge and into the river channel, Wei Wuxian began to act up again. He cast his bamboo pole aside, set his foot on the side of the boat, and, using the water as a mirror, examined his hair to see if it had gotten messy. As though he hadn't just fought water ghosts and fled from the mouth of a watery abyss, he calmly and confidently shot flirtatious smiles at the river's two shores. He said, "Sisters, how much for half a kilo of loquats?" He was very young and had a bright, dashing appearance that glowed with vitality and spirit, veritably a frolicking peach blossom chasing after the flow of the river. A smile bloomed on the face of a woman nearby, and she pulled up her bamboo hat, saying, "Oh, you little charmer, how about I give you one free of charge?" The notes of woo in her voice were pure, sweet, and soft, like sticky rice. From her lips sprang touching melodies, filling the ears of those who listened with fragrance. Wei-Wuxian cupped his hands and said, "Naturally, anything sister wishes to give me, I want." The woman reached into her basket and felt for a round, golden locket, which she tossed toward him. "No need to be polite," she said. "It's for your good looks." Swiftly, the boats sailed toward each other, the hulls brushing by as they passed. Wei-Wuxian turned, caught the locket head-on, and grinned. "You're even more pretty," he said, as he deluged the townsfolk with flowery words, flitting all over the place like a bee or butterfly. Lan Wangji gazed resolutely ahead. The picture of noble character and unimpeachable integrity. Gleefully tossing the locket around in his hands, Wei-Wuxian suddenly pointed at him and said, "Sisters, do you think he's handsome?" Lan Wangji had entirely failed to anticipate that he would suddenly be pulled into the conversation and had no idea how to respond. The woman on the river spoke in harmony. "He's even more handsome." A smattering of male laughter seemed to be mixed in with the chorus. "Then who's going to give him a locket?" Wei-Wuxian asked. "If you give one to me, but not to him, I'm afraid he'll be jealous." The entire river rippled with sounds of chirping, crackling laughter. Ahead, another woman rowed toward him. "All right, all right, all right. I'll give you a second. Eat mine. Here, charmer, catch." The second locket fell into Wei-Wuxian's hands, and he shouted, "Sister is beautiful and has a good heart. Next time I come here, I'll buy some. I'll buy a whole basket." The woman's voice was bright and glittering, and she was bold. Pointing at Lan Wangji, she said, "Make him come too. Come buy my lockets together." Wei-Wuxian stuck the recently gifted locket in front of Lan Wangji's eyes. The boy stared levelly ahead and said, "Take it away." "I just knew you wouldn't want it, so I wasn't planning on giving it to you in the first place," Wei-Wuxian said. He removed the fruit from Lan Wangji's face and said, "Zheng Cheng, catch." Zheng Cheng swept by on another boat just at the right time and caught the locket in one hand. His face cracked into a slight smile, but soon after he snorted. "Preening and flirting again? Go away," Wei-Wuxian said, as pleased with himself as the fragrant spring breeze. He then turned and continued, "Lan Chan, since you're from Gusu, you can also speak the local dialect, right? How about you teach me how to curse in the Gusu tongue?" Lan Wangji tossed a ridiculous at him and boarded a different boat. Wei-Wuxian hadn't had any hopes of him actually replying. It was only that he found the lilting tones of the locals highly amusing, and it occurred to him that Lan Wangji must have also spoken in a similar dialect since he was young. It was fun to tease him about it, that was all. Wei-Wuxian tilted his head upward and drank a gulp of glutinous rice wine. Then, carrying the shiny, round black jar, he pushed on his bamboo pole and went to fool around with Zheng Cheng. Meanwhile, Lan Wangji and Lan Xichen stood side by side, their expressions even looking somewhat similar this time. Both their hearts seemed heavy and their minds troubled. They pondered the answers to the challenges the aquatic abyss posed, and how they would explain things to the mayor of Sai Town, and the many resulting arrangements they would have to make. From up ahead, A cargo boat laden with basket upon basket of golden loquats floated toward them. Lan Wangji glanced at it, before again staring fixedly forward. But Lan Xichen said, "Since you want to eat some loquats, why don't we buy a basket and take it home?" "I do not want any," Lan Wangji said. Then he brushed something off his sleeve and moved away. Once again, he changed